He's been talking about the aggressive approach which scares people off, and and rightly so, because the whole trick here, if you want to call it a trick, is for us to share our experience and not to preach and not to rant and rave and not to show aggressiveness and not to show a closed-mindedness. Fortunately, it says, for such aggression in the name of spirituality isn't often seen nowadays. Yet this sorry and unusual episode can be turned to good account. We can ask ourselves whether, in the less obvious but nevertheless destructive forms, we are not more subject to fits of spiritual pride than we had supposed. If constantly worked at, I'm sure that no kind of self-survey could be more beneficial. Nothing could more surely increase our communication with each other and with God. Now, I read this to be a plea to you and me to inventory our own approach to others on the subject of spirituality. I'd like to suggest to you that the Big Book and the 12 steps are real clear on how this works if we do it right. First of all, we will tell the newcomer how we recovered, and it tells us to stress the spiritual freely. But this is our spiritual growth and our spiritual experience. Remember in Bill's story, Bill was told by Evie, all that's necessary is for you to form your own conception of God. There is no AA God. And we don't ask you to memorize a catechism or pass a spiritual test of any kind or a religious test. You're free to choose your own conception of God. But also, even though you are now an unbeliever, it's only necessary that you be willing to believe, and that's where it all starts. So this avoids, you see, all of the pitfalls of saying, if you don't believe as I believe, you will drink again. Well, that's not true. That's not true. What we talk about then is what we did. Here's what I did, and that's what the Big Book talks about. It tells us what they did, precisely what they did, to come to a spiritual awakening, because it's in the action. Everything in this program has to do with the actions we take. None of it has to do with memorizing some philosophy or some religious concept. It all has to do with taking action, seeking God. And so, we can ask ourselves whether, in less obvious but nevertheless destructive forms, we are not more subject to fits of spiritual pride than we had supposed. So he's asking us to look to see how we act, what are our motives, and how do we approach the newcomer. Many years ago, a so-called unbeliever brought me to see this very clearly. He was an MD and a fine one. I met him and his wife Mary at the home of a friend in a Midwestern city. It was a purely social evening. Our fellowship of alcoholics was my sole topic, and I pretty much monopolized the conversation. Nevertheless, the doctor and his lady seemed truly interested, and he asked many questions. But one of them made me suspect that he was an agnostic, or maybe an atheist. This promptly triggered me, and I set out to convert him, then and there. Deadly serious, I actually bragged about my spectacular spiritual experience of the year before. The doctor mildly wondered if that experience might not be something other than I thought it was. This hit me hard, and I was downright rude. There had been no real provocation. The doctor was uniformly courteous, good-humored, and even respectful. Not a little wistfully, he said he often wished he had a firm faith too, but plainly enough, I had convinced him of nothing. 3 years later, I revisited my Midwestern friend. Mary, the doctor's wife, came by for a call, and I learned that he had died the week before. Much affected, she began to speak of him. His was a noted Boston family. He'd been Harvard educated. A brilliant student, he might have gone on to fame in his profession. He could have enjoyed a wealthy practice and a social life among old friends. Instead, he insisted on being a company doctor in what was a strife-torn industrial town. When Mary had sometimes asked why they didn't go back to Boston, he would take her hand and say, "Maybe you're right, but I can't bring myself to leave. I think the people at the company really need me." Mary then recalled she had never known her husband to complain seriously about anything or to criticize anyone bitterly. Though he appeared to be perfectly well, the doctor slowed down in his last 5 years. When Mary prodded him to go out evenings and tried to get to the office on time, he always came up with a plausible and good-natured excuse. Not until his last illness did she know that all this while he'd carried about a heart condition that could have done him in at any moment. Except for a single doctor and his staff, no one had an inkling. When she reproached him about this, he simply said, "Well, I can see no good in causing people to worry about me, especially you, my dear." Now this was the story of a man of great spiritual worth. The hallmarks were plain to be seen: humor and patience, gentleness and courage, humility and dedication, unselfishness and love, a demonstration I might never come near to making myself. This was the man I had chided and patronized. This was the unbeliever I had presumed to instruct. Now let's look at these attributes that Bill cites here for this doctor. Humor, that's something we practice, isn't it? Patience, we are patient. We practice patience. Gentleness, gentleness is something that we practice, something we do. Courage, we demonstrate courage. Humility, we act with humility rather than with pridefulness. Dedication, we are dedicated. We don't just think about it. It's not a state of mind. It's what we do. We act in a dedicated way. Unselfishness, we act with unselfishness. And love. Love is not a state of mind, by the way. Love is loving action, or it's nothing. Love which is not acted upon is exactly the same as faith. Faith without works is dead. Love without loving action is dead. And when we look at this, what do we find? We find this doctor demonstrating all of his affairs, all of those attributes that we would want to ascribe to someone who is spiritually fit. These are the attributes we would like to have for ourselves. But notice that each and every one of those had to do with the way the doctor conducted his life. And that's the key for us. This program is not about undisclosed states of mind. When we read in the 10th step, the love and tolerance of others is our code, that doesn't mean that we carry around some vague idea of being loving. It means that we act with love. It doesn't mean that we have an attitude of toleration. It means that we tolerate. We are tolerant. And so when we learn this, then we see that what we're learning through the steps is to constantly act upon these things which we ought to do, which in and of itself will always inevitably lead to a spiritual awakening. Mary told us this story more than 20 years ago. Then for the first time it burst in upon me how very dead faith can be when minus responsibility. Faith without responsibility is dead. The responsibility to carry that faith, to act upon it. The doctor had an unwavering belief in his ideals, but he also practiced humility, wisdom, and responsibility. Hence his superb demonstration. Down at the last paragraph, therefore, and I'll believe this with all my heart, Faith is more than our greatest gift. Its sharing with others is our greatest responsibility. So may we of AA continually seek the wisdom and the willingness by which we may well fulfill that immense trust which the giver of all perfect gifts has placed in our hands. That's our article for tonight. And now we share with each other, like to share on faith or how we work in expressing our faith to others, or our spiritual feelings to others, or anything which is comparable to that. Please do. And let's start out. Who would like to begin the discussion, please?
Well, my name's Tom. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Tom.
Hi, Tom. And I can tell you about the faith I had 3 years ago. I started recording Jim, and I thought he had an awesome message. And I went to another group that just put me down for it and said, "You're just believing nothing," you know. And I heard some bad things. I knew that the word was, Jim's message was really good, and I just had faith that it would help a lot of people, and it has. But I could have listened to all those people that are down on me, and I kept faith, and I knew that it would help people, and I'm still doing it 3 years later.
Yeah, we got kicked out of the Pompano Beach room, didn't we, Tom?
Yeah.
You remember that old biddy that was in there who was saying that, well, it's against the tradition. You can't record anything. And so we said, okay, we're out of here. Thank you, Tom. Who's next? Go.
I'll just share something that was going on in my life right now. For a long time, I truly believed that I was supposed to be doing spiritual things, and right now I'm in the process of selling a business that I have. I'm doing environmental work, and I believe it's in the best interest for the company to sell this business to another company that will grow it. I think it'll be the best thing for the employees, and I think that God has intentions for me to do things to help other people, and I believe that one day I'm supposed to open up a treatment center to help alcoholics and addicts. And the thing is, it's like when I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, I get ridiculed by a lot of people, and it makes it very difficult dealing with all the feelings that nobody has trust or faith. But I know in my heart that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. The thing for me is selling this business is not a financial windfall for me, and I do know that I'm going to have to try to do some other things to generate some more money to even try to start a treatment center. But I truly have faith that will happen. I believe that when you're trying to do good things, things that I think God wants me to do, He will make it all happen, and I know that for a fact. As long as I'm not, as long as my motives aren't self-seeking, as long as my motives are that of trying to do good for others. And when I started the company that I have doing environmental work, I started it out as a business that would be good to the employees, so I would be fair to the employees. And the thing is, we were one of the few companies that survived economic downfall in the environmental industry. And I believe everything that happened that kept us going, it was, as I look back, it was only God that made it successful. It wasn't anything I had to do. I showed up and did what I could, but it was definitely a higher power that made it all happen. And I'm going to try to do the next right thing and see what happens later on.
Good. Thank you. I think Bill would call what you've just described as having the vision for your future. And I want to read you something he wrote about that. He says, vision is, I think, the ability to make good estimates both for the immediate and for the more distant future. Some might feel this sort of striving to be a sort of heresy, because we AAs are constantly telling ourselves one day at a time. But that valued maxim really refers to our emotional lives. It means only that we are not to repine over the past, nor wishfully fantasize or daydream about our future. As individuals, we shall surely suffer if we cast the whole job of planning for tomorrow on a kind of providence. God has endowed us human beings with considerable capability for foresight, and He evidently expects us to use it. Therefore, we must distinguish between wishful dreaming for a happy tomorrow, today's use of our powers of thoughtful estimate of a kind which we trust will bring future progress rather than unforeseen woe. And I think there is a massive difference between a vision that we have as opposed to that which we try to force to happen, or demand that it happen, or expect to happen. Those expectations will kill us. But when we act upon that vision, it sets into action, brings all the forces into play. All the dynamics are there. And then as we go forward, things begin to open up for us. If your vision is to have a treatment center, you keep that vision firmly in front of you, and all the other people around you are utterly irrelevant. Irrelevant. They mean nothing. You keep your eye on your vision and you work toward it, and it'll be amazing what will happen. And when we find that good is coming out of our actions, it's always wise to give God credit. Always wise, because that's the truth of it. That's where credit belongs. You know, guys, it isn't a question of bragging or overstating anything when we say that we have a way. In 1935, there was no way. People didn't stay sober. The doctors couldn't do it for us. The churches didn't do it for us. Psychiatrists didn't do it for us. There was no hope. And since 1935, that way has grown and grown and grown, and it has proven itself now with literally millions of recoveries. This is no longer any kind of guesswork. It's a fact. This stuff works. The big problem is we have to be willing to do it. The Big Book makes it very clear. If he or she is to find God, the desire must come from within. And there isn't any way that we can open up their heads and pour that in. We can't force it to happen. It's got to happen for each of us individually. And when it does, and we really want to seek God and we really want recovery, then yes, we have the way. And John, it never fails. Never fails. Provided we do the work. And what happens is the failures, if you watch them, are either those who never tried or those who gave up trying somewhere along the way, or those who went all the way and then stopped going. Somewhere along the line, we fail. The program never fails us. That's the truth of it. Who's next now?
I really like this reading, and the thing that stood out for me the most was that the doctor had an unwavering belief in his ideals, that he also practiced unity with wisdom and responsibility. This is a demonstration. And I remember that as you start listening about our faith and being so far removed from the ideals and so on. And that was me. I went to Catholic convent school and talked a lot about Jesus and do unto others as you would like unto yourself and things like that. But when I was drinking, I was just moved so far away from God. And it was quite embarrassing. I had a lot of shame when I came back. It's just quite embarrassing that I talked about, and I did the Lord's Prayer, and then I went out and engaged in all kinds of silliness. That took me to that place of incomprehensible demoralization. And I needed to get there. You know, John said you've got to go through what you've got to go through, and I got there, and I came crawling back on my knees. And I don't know that if people who talk about spirituality haven't experienced the other end of it, live in life where, like I was talking about spirituality, but living in this bottom, this low bottom. I don't know if people have reached that low bottom. Because once you reach that low bottom, there's nothing left, and you don't talk anymore. You start doing the work. You start changing. You start living again. And there is no more room for talk, really, for me. If I'm not doing it and I'm not living a spiritual life, I'm screwed. I'm literally screwed. I'll make all the wrong decisions. I'll take all the easy ways out. And I'll really embarrass myself when I'm doing it. So what I found when I came to this program was I found my morals again, and I did my 4th step, and I started to become aware of certain things, and I understand who I am now. I know what my standards are. I know what my ideals are, and now I have to live them, just like the doctor said. About the doctor, and I agree with John sometimes that I've found that there are people who talk a lot about spirituality. The ones that talk more about spirituality are the least spiritual.
In our 4th step, in the 3rd section dealing with fears, it says that we never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. And it goes along with our 3rd step prayer, doesn't it? We ask God to take away our difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those we would help of God's love, His power, and His way of life. So we're asking Him to make us examples. And the greatest teaching tool we have, especially when it comes to this question of spirituality, is that we live a spiritual way of life. And we demonstrate through all of our affairs that God is working in our lives. That's the best way we have of carrying the message. And I agree with what you said, that it's easy to talk about God and spirituality. The most facile of all of the talents which God has given human beings is speech. We can, and you hear that and you see that demonstrated constantly around the rooms. Lots and lots of people know how to talk a good game. But if you watch very carefully, you'll find that not that many know or care to live what they're talking about. And there's an interesting corollary to that. If you want to know somebody, you watch what they do. That'll tell you who and what they are. And you live your life in a principled way, and when people watch you live your life, they know you are a principled person. The way it comes down is this: if I can say that Nilu is a woman of integrity, I don't have to say anything else, because everybody knows you then. And if I must say Nilu is not a woman of integrity, I don't have to say anything else. They know all about you then too. And so these are really interesting things, because we have worshipped at the throne of verbosity and show and ornateness, and yet the simple things are what really tell the tale. We live a life of spiritual fitness and spiritual giving and love, self-sacrifice. It shows. And that's where people will be attracted, not to the preacher, You know, the biggest problem that preachers have these days is they want to tell us how we ought to be. They don't know how to tell us how to be. And we can say, yeah, I know I ought to be that way. And I agree with you totally, minister. And then an hour later we wonder, but that's fine, but how do I do that? We don't have to wonder in here, do we? We have the 12 steps. See, we know what to do because the principles that we follow are all stated as steps of action. What a marvelous thing that is. We don't ever have to wonder what to do. We just pick up the book and follow directions. It's all it ever takes. Gosh, if we could just get that message across to everybody, wouldn't that be wonderful? Who's next, please?
Reading this, I've been around people, I guess, like everybody else has in their life, in and out of AA. When I came here, I just didn't want to drink anymore. But, in my life, I've been around people that I've enjoyed to be around, and I've been around people that I didn't enjoy to be around. Okay, and that's life. I found myself with my short term of sobriety, a little more than 18 months after a long time drinking. It doesn't matter, but I found myself, judging people, which I can't hold back on. I got these two words that keep coming in my brain, and I can't get them out: lunatic and fanatic. I don't like either one. I don't like fanatics. I don't like lunatics. It's just like I asked a guy, on the group the other day, how you doing? I'm doing the same I'm always doing. I'm working my steps, And I said to myself, I'm kidding to somebody else, I said hello to a priest the other day, but he didn't tell me he was working the Ten Commandments,
Good one. Good one.
We all have to, do things our own way, to make us well. I've been in meetings, we all have, where people found God and they drank the next day, or I had one guy tell me, if you don't pray, you're going to drink, stuff like that. It's all part of being around AA, but, I think back to my life, and it's a good feeling when you did meet people that you really respected. If you can think back, people that you knew and you never heard them say anything bad about anybody. It was nice that those people crossed your path, because it makes you feel good to know people like that.
And Jean has something she wants to share with us.
Oh, you saw me have it.
Of course I saw you.
Okay.
I never miss you.
All right. When the doctor's wife was telling Bill how the doctor was and his life and all these things that he was and what kind of a man he was, there's an old saying, and it goes something like, if you want to know how a person is doing, don't ask them, ask their family. And that's what that reminded me of when we were reading it. And that's so true, because I know I'm sure I've been guilty, as a lot of us have been in this room, about how, we're doing really good. And I don't know about anybody else, but I hit people over the head with this a lot. Not as bad as I used to be. Sometimes it works for, I do the best that I can. And like when we were reading tonight about we learn from our mistakes. I keep praying that I'm going to keep learning, and it is a process, and I do need to learn. But nevertheless, and it's also very interesting how when we judge other people, I know I'm guilty of that, as we all, I like to say we all because it makes me feel better too. But when I do tend to judge other people, and I'm not aware of it, and that brings me back to how Bill did that too. He was judging that doctor because he wasn't,
Sure.
and how he didn't know the person, and so, that's another lesson, not to judge, because it is an objectionable character trait. We do have power over that, and God can remove that. from us, as long as we're aware. And, you know, then we're more effective, I believe. I'd be more effective to a person to sit down with them, because sometimes, most of the time, people just want to be heard.
Well, I seriously want to debate you on this business of, you want to know a person, ask their family? My goodness.
Well, what do you want to say?
Before they, I have one only ex-wife. If you'd ask her about me, I guarantee you what you heard wouldn't have had any relationship whatsoever to the truth.
What I meant was generally.
Oh, I see.
There are exceptions to that.
Generally, yeah.
Like when we say, I'll pray for you, there are exceptions, right?
I certainly hope so.
Okay. So.
If you wanted to know Marilyn, would you ask Marilyn's family? Probably so. She's got an extended family. I have wonderful things to say about Marilyn.
In the big book, when Bill talks about the family at home, that's where we have to demonstrate by our actions.
Sure.
So this is what I'm talking about. As long as you have people that love you. I mean, if you're gonna, you know, if you have crazy people around you, well, you're not gonna ask.
Well, now don't try to explain.
Well, you get my drift, right?
Oh yeah, I got your drift. I think you drifted clear out into the blue yonder somewhere.
Pray for him.
Yes,
I'll pray for you.
Oh God! Oh, I'm coming, Elizabeth. I'm coming. The worst insult. Go ahead, Doc. See if you can add some sanity to this proceeding, will you?
A quick comment. We skipped the first 2 pages of this and then went into this, but if this is all about where we're saying here, the dilemma of no faith, and this is Bill going ahead and reading into the attributes of this doctor in this town that he was at. And here it is, he's saying that the doc had humor and patience, gentleness and courage, humility and dedication, and unselfishness and love. How do you feel about the fact that here he was out there and for 5 or 7 years, whatever, he wasn't telling his wife, and it seems like they had a very close, loving relationship that lasted, many years, because here it's going back now that they're still seeing Bill 20 years later down the road, that he didn't tell his wife for a good long time of that he was, genuinely sick with a heart condition. And what about the love and the sharing and the caring and all that of not going on because, quote, there's nothing she could do, so why go ahead and tell her? How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't know, but you're the doctor around this table. Why don't you tell us? What's wrong with that? You think that the wife had the right to know and that he should have told her?
I think she absolutely has the right to know, and for him to say it, or for Bill to read into it where he's saying that's unselfish, I think that's very selfish. And for him to make the unilateral decision that she needn't know, and this doctor in this question was, I can make the decision. Now don't forget, he's a doctor in his 50s, and for whatever reason, and I don't know quite what it was, but that decision was they make life and death decisions without informing patients, and that still goes on today for some reason, and I don't know why that is, it's just stupid. But to have that sort of decision where I can make the decision and what can she do? Nothing, so why tell her? To me that's the heights of absurdity. And if she even can't do anything, the vows that they were taking in marriage were in sickness and in health, till death do us part. And the closest person, if he had a fidelity in his marriage, the only person I will be with the rest of my life, and I will not tell her what's going on with my health history. Balderdash.
Balderdash. All right, Doc. Well, you're pretty passionate about that. Anyone else like to comment on that? Yes, and Marilyn would.
I agree wholeheartedly with Doc.
I figured you would.
I figured that man was definitely dishonest. I I don't see him doing a 10-step every night. Where was I dishonest? And God not saying, how are your wife? Hello?
But you got to remember, in the 50s, this was in the 40s, not the 50s. They were the wife was kept barefoot and pregnant.
Yeah.
She didn't have to know any of this
Talk
stuff.
about a lot of
But if
It's not an excuse, but it was a different era.
But it's still.
The good old days.
You know what? It doesn't matter to me.
I'm gonna smack you.
I was just talking to Neela about this today. It doesn't matter to me what other people do, how they act or anything like that. The only thing that's important to me is that I do my steps, that I do my inventory, because if I don't, I'll get drunk. So you can act any way you want, and how you act, either good or bad, is really of no consequence to me. I just have to work on me.
But if we go back into the 12 steps and into how we've always said, if the golden rule was, if I treat you the way I wanted to be treated, then that stops right there, and that really predates even the 1940s. I wouldn't punch you, you don't have any right to punch me. I never had a right to go ahead and hit a kid in the 20s, 30s, or 40s. I still don't have a right to do it now. And that transcends all the last decades of, well, that was way back then. No, good behavior was always good behavior. And you know when it's right or wrong, and I still think that still goes on right now. So if we go back and think about that, decent behavior of what you would tell a loved one is still decent behavior now of what you would tell a loved one. But I was just wondering, if we took a poll of everybody here, where we are right now, I guess if we can, if you thought it was right that he would share that information, or somebody in your family, a loved one right now, was ill and was going to do that.
What's the objective? We're trying to condemn the guy.
No, we're just asking a question.
I'm telling you, in the 40s, you couldn't do anything for anybody.
No, not even in the 40s. Right now, if it was now...
People died, there was no open heart surgery or nothing.
No, that doesn't matter. What we're saying is between the communication of where it goes right now. If somebody was deathly ill in the family, we were, would we want to share it with a loved one in our family, or would we let it go and just be quiet about it and not tell anybody?
I have a comment before we make that.
Sure.
Poll. Maybe he says in there that he answered to her that he did not want to worry.
I think
So what
that
is
too.
motive? His motive?
No, but...
It's like, can I finish?
Sure.
His motive was clean, and that's what we always have to check. For me, I got to check my motives while I'm doing something. And sometimes, what I think is right, it could be right. Sometimes, you might think I'm doing wrong, but if my motives are clean, I might open the door to someone, a disabled person, and they may get upset. But that's right to me because my motive was to help. So his motive was to help, and society may judge that as an infidelity to his marriage, but I don't think that's what he was trying to do. So I don't want to be a participant of your poll.
Okay, thank you, Neil. In the back.
And what Jim said about the barefoot pregnant part about the wife back then is the part that I was thinking about. And it goes back to the meeting before this in the big book when they're talking to the wives, and Bill's talking to the wives about their fear and stuff. And back then, I don't think anybody, I know I wouldn't have wanted to know. If I was a wife back then, if my husband was a doctor and I depended on his, not only his companionship, but his financial security, I wouldn't want to know. I would be worried sick. I'd have no way to deal with that. I'd be very fearful. And I think the guy did a really sacrificial thing. I really like the different time that it was done. Something else I wanted to share was about the article that was read out of the Language of the Heart. I always wondered why some people were born naturally with spirituality, and I wasn't, or why I wasn't coming out. And that was a perfect example of people being so humble a little too much, but the doctor in that article reminds me of last week's Language of the Heart meeting about Dr. Silkworth and him walking that last mile with Bill. If you remember that But
You know, he walked the last mile. Absolutely, he died with his boots on in his hospital, still helping.
Reminds me of all the people that aren't alcoholics that help alcoholics that are spiritual.
Yeah. Well, you know, Marilyn and Doc, in my opinion, are both right, and I'll tell you why. There are principles by which we must live, and it is true, and there are balancing factors here. For example, there is a spiritual principle which we must live by, that we're not ever to harm another person. But also, where we have pledged fidelity to one person, we owe them, I believe, the absolute truth at all times. It seems to me that a relationship not built on that complete truth could never be a relationship of trust, and that there's probably something wrong with the expressions of love, that they're not really there. That's just my opinion about it, but I'm convinced that there are spiritual principles which are applicable to all human beings and are not to be violated under any circumstances for any reason whatsoever. And I think this is probably one of them. Marilyn and Doc and Nilu are people who are steeped in the principles as stated in our steps, and well, they should be. So I see their point of view, and I think I would lean in their direction on this person. We've reached the end of the rope here, guys. I'm sorry to say. This has been a wonderful meeting. I really appreciate all the great sharing. We got to pay the rent now, guys. And this Unholy Alliance rent is called the 101 Club. Nicks us for a bunch of money every month, so we got to put a few bucks aside to pay them.